Joe?
Yes, ma'am.
I got out of the WebEx. I got into the calendar. How do I get back?
Uh-oh. You're back, Grace, but you're muted. You're muted.
Back. Thank you, sir.
Yep.
Congresswoman, you can go ahead and start.
First meeting of the Subcommittee on Water Resources and Environment for the 117th Congress. I call this hearing to order, and I ask unanimous consent that the chair be authorized to declare any recess at the time during today's hearing, and without objection. In addressing those needs. It's a privilege to serve as the chairwoman of this subcommittee. I am pleased to be joined by my colleague and ranking member, Congressman Rouser. I guess not yet. From Wilmington, North Carolina. We had a great meeting a few weeks ago, and I look forward to working with him. I also welcome the new members to the subcommittee, Carolyn Bordeaux of Georgia, Eleanor Holmes Norton from the District of Columbia, Greg Stanton of Arizona, Steve Cohen of Tennessee, John Katko, my friend and co-chair of the Mental Health Caucus of New York, and Nancy Mace of South Carolina. The subcommittee will have a busy agenda in the 117th Congress, and I pledge to continue the longstanding tradition of this subcommittee to work in a bipartisan fashion, trying to address the priorities of all members and being respectful when we disagree. We have an ambitious but achievable agenda this Congress. We will hold hearings on WORDA 2020 implementation and lay the groundwork for the enactment of the new WORDA bill in 2022. We will want to hear from stakeholders about the implementation of Congress's changes to the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund. We will look at ways to make our communities more resilient and learning about how we can use natural infrastructure, water recycling, my favorite subject, and other tools. We also plan to look at ways to ensure tribal communities and disadvantaged communities are included in the planning process for all water infrastructure projects in their communities. We will strive to enact a water infrastructure financing bill that not only reauthorizes the Clean Water State Revolving Fund, or the SRF, but also seeks to provide greater assistance to rural and tribal communities to address the affordability challenges facing all our communities and to encourage innovative, energy efficient, and green infrastructure projects. Last Congress, the House passed H.R. 2 that would have reauthorized the SRF fund. It would also have addressed a number of issues we will be discussing today, including the need to help rural and tribal communities and the need to invest in water reuse and recycling projects. The SRF did not pass the Senate last year, but we will try again soon. Finally, we will renew our constitutional obligation to exercise congressional oversight over implementation of the laws within our subcommittee's jurisdiction. And before we begin, a few reminders. Since we are participating remotely, as chair of today's hearing, I will make good faith effort to provide every member experiencing connectivity issues an opportunity to fully participate in the proceedings. If a member is experiencing any connectivity issues or other technical problems, please inform committee staff as soon as possible so you can receive assistance. A chat function is available for members on Cisco WebEx platform for this purpose, and they can also call the committee's main phone line at 202-225-4472. Again, 202-225-4472 for technical assistance by phone. And finally, to insert a document to the record, please have your staff email it to documentstni@mail.house.gov. Again, documentstni@mail.house.gov. Now for my opening statement. On the topic of this hearing, today our nation's network of sewers, stormwater, conveyance, and treatment facilities are aging, often outdated, and in many places not meeting the needs of our communities or water quality standards. The American Society of Civil Engineers gave America's wastewater infrastructure a grade of D+, D+ in its 2017 infrastructure report card. A new ASCE report card is expected soon, but we expect another poor low grade. According to the EPA, communities report a need of 271 billion of investment over the next 20 years to bring their wastewater treatment systems up to date in the state of good repair. The need for sanitation infrastructure on tribal lands totals 2.78 billion, and the tribal lands 2.78. Yet these statistics only tell half the story. As noted, our witnesses here today, many communities also face the challenge of ensuring the water and sewer utilities to remain affordable to those living in the community. As the communities of all sizes seek to improve the quality, safety, and reliability of their water utilities, we must give them a voice, as they often struggle. They must also address the challenge of declining base rates, lower income households, and other competing local needs. All of these factors compel us to search for ways to make water quality improvements more affordable to all communities. Congress has already taken significant steps to meet this challenge through enactment of integrated planning legislation and the promotion of nature-based or green infrastructure alternatives to addressing the local water challenges. We have provided tools to all communities to develop more cost-effective long-term plans to meet local water challenges. Getting the message directly to those involved is also a challenge. However, more needs to be done. We have to find ways to make sure the cost of federal financing is affordable to all communities and get them to the table to access this financing. One significant step that is long overdue is to reauthorize the Clean Water State Revolving Fund, CRF, a goal that has eluded Congress for almost 30 years. As the witnesses note, this program is universally important to provide affordable financing to urban and rural communities alike, and its successes are typically limited only by a lack of available funding sources. We are still planning to soon reintroduce the Water Quality Protection and Job Creation Act to reauthorize the Clean Water SRF, and I strongly recommend all of our members to support this effort to address local water quality challenges. However, for those communities where our state revolving fund is not enough to address local affordability needs, we need to ensure other tools are available. We need to fund targeted clean water grants, such as those authorized for combined and sanitary sewer overflows and stormwater capture and reuse in 2018 Water Resources Development Act. Rural communities face a unique set of challenges. They tend to be small and not have a base rate large enough to shoulder expensive major infrastructure projects while maintaining affordable rates. Often, rural communities do not have the technical expertise necessary to design wastewater projects or to even complete the technical documents necessary to apply for funding. In addition, rural communities may have to apply to multiple state or federal programs to obtain the assistance they need, and the duplicative application requirements make it very costly and time-consuming to complete. I urge all of our members to pay very close attention, listen to the stories, and to reflect on the real challenges all our American families face every day in obtaining safe and affordable water and wastewater services. At this time, I am pleased to yield to my colleague, the ranking member of Subcommittee, Mr. Rouser, for any thoughts you may have. Mr. Rouser?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I too enjoyed our visit the other week, enjoyed it a great deal, in fact. I want to thank our witnesses for participating in this hearing today. I'm happy we have such a diverse panel so that we can gain your perspectives on the issues facing local communities and addressing the nation's water and wastewater infrastructure needs. These needs, as we all know, are substantial, and they continue to grow. In many communities, water and wastewater infrastructure is long past its design life and in need of urgent repair, replacement, and upgrading. As a result, leaks and blockages are all too common across the nation and represent a massive waste of a vital and sometimes scarce resource. Additionally, the needs are especially urgent for hundreds of communities trying to remedy the problem of combined sewer overflows, CSOs, and sanitary sewer overflows, also known as SSOs. Shrinking municipal budgets, insufficient independent financing capabilities, and increasingly burdensome regulations without the necessary federal support have strained communities' efforts to address these critical needs. This is especially the case for many of our small and rural communities that many of us all around the country represent. According to EPA, the total documented needs for sustainable water infrastructure, CSO and SSO correction, and stormwater management across our great country total at least $270 billion over the course of the next 20 years. The needs for drinking water infrastructure drive this figure to more than $600 billion, and these are considered fairly conservative estimates. In my home state of North Carolina alone, $11 billion will be needed for clean water needs such as wastewater treatment systems and sanitary sewers over the next 20 years. So with talk of a major infrastructure package, today we need to ask the not-so-simple questions. What funding level is both appropriate and realistic, and how are we going to pay for it? Talk of authorizing enormous dollar amounts is not going to address these needs, since unrealistically high dollar numbers that will never get funded create a false hope and ultimately solve nothing. I believe it's going to take an all-hands-on-deck approach to reverse the decline of our nation's water infrastructure. Federal, state, and local investment will be necessary, but cannot be relied upon to solve all of the problems. Instead, we need to move away from business as usual and utilize every tool available. This means searching for new sources of funding, increasing collaboration between the public and private sectors, and improving how federal regulations are implemented, or deciding that they're not needed at all. We need smarter asset management, increased efficiencies in our water systems, and to achieve that, we need to incentivize the adoption of new and innovative technologies that will cut costs and improve water quality. In addition, communities, particularly those that are struggling to address their needs and reduce the financial burdens on households, need to be given greater regulatory flexibility, including through the implementation of a vibrant integrated planning and permitting approach in addressing the compliance mandates that have been imposed upon them. It's been 10 years since EPA developed its first guidance for implementing integrated planning, but the agency has been slow to work with states and communities to develop the most effective and cost-efficient approaches for meeting clean water objectives. 2 years ago, legislation that codified EPA's integrated planning initiative was enacted. EPA now needs to work with the states and effectively implement the initiative to help communities meet their needs in a more cost-efficient manner. We need to carefully prioritize our investments in water infrastructure to ensure that we are adequately protecting the public health, promoting the economic growth of our communities, and preventing the degradation of the environment. I look forward to hearing the thoughts from our witnesses today on these very important and pressing issues. Madam Chair, I yield back.
Mr. Rouser, Mr. DeFazio, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks to the ranking member for his thoughts. We're setting a very ambitious number, or want to, for the SRF reauthorization. These dollars, the estimates by the National Utility Contractors Association is every billion invested creates 28,000 good paying jobs. Now, there's been a lot of carrying on about the president canceling the XL pipeline. Well, that would have created one time 10,000 jobs, would have also destroyed the boreal forests of Canada, dramatically accelerated climate change with the dirtiest fuel possible, etc. How about we do something that actually helps the environment and makes this a healthier country to live in. Let's invest in our wastewater infrastructure. It is a realistic number. We can get there very easily. For instance, my transaction tax to drive out the parasite speculators on Wall Street who front run the market with supercomputers would raise $77 billion a year. Now, is it better to let them become billionaires providing a useless product and driving up stock prices for everybody else? Or would it be better to say, hey, let's rebuild the nation's wastewater infrastructure? Wow. And if we invested $5 billion a year, that would be 140,000 jobs a year. Good jobs, Davis-Bacon jobs, jobs that provide for a very good living wage and also for benefits like healthcare and other things. We have new challenges. As has been noted both by the chair and the ranking member, systems are aging out. They are being overwhelmed by population growth. They are being overwhelmed by severe climate events due to climate change. These are real problems, and we have to get ahead of this. We have to plan for the future. Systems go underwater in hurricanes. That's happened in the ranking members district and in other districts around the country. I have a system in my district that is at a very severe risk of flooding and contaminating two very large lakes. And also I have a beach area in Oregon, Sunset Bay, which is one of the most polluted beaches in the country because of the combined sewer overflow. We cannot afford not to make these investments, and we can't put all of the burden on the cities and counties and the individual ratepayers to do this. We need to spread that a little more widely because water doesn't observe state boundaries, city lines, state lines, county lines, or anything. This is an investment for all Americans. We did this 50 years ago, and we can't do it now. That's just extraordinary to me. How puny do you think we have become? We are better than that. We can meet these challenges today. When I was a county commissioner, we had a 75% federal match to build our system. And we have since, continually upgraded it. The population of the area has tripled. And we're still got capacity in that system. So these investments will yield huge benefits, economic benefits, returns to cities, counties, states, and the federal government in terms of taxes and economic activity with good, safe growth that doesn't jeopardize the environment. So I'm going to push for a very ambitious number, and then we're going to find ways to pay for it. We're not going to be puny and say, gee, sorry, we can't help you. At the current level of investment, it would take 171 years to bring the existing systems up to a state of good repair, and that doesn't even include areas that don't have systems, like tribal territories and others. So that is not acceptable. And I believe this administration, as part of their package, will adopt very ambitious goals in their infrastructure bill. And then the one other thing that I want to add into this is, as much as possible, we want to use natural systems. I have something called the, I got to remember the name, but it made the list that McCain used to put out because it was supposedly, falling waters, because they actually use a very large natural area to do their tertiary treatment, and it's actually a Pleasant Park area because it's tertiary treatment. And so we want to look at incorporating natural systems wherever we can. And we also want to incentivize the wastewater districts to capture their methane, 26 times as potent as CO2 in causing climate change. We can, and I was inspired by a testimony 2 years ago from a sewer district in New Jersey that rebuilt their system, captured their methane, generated their own electricity, and sold electricity onto the grid, had a new system, and didn't have to substantially raise their rates and help the environment. So there are better ways to do this, innovative and interesting ways to do this using 21st century technology. I look forward to hearing from the witnesses today about their ideas on how we can accomplish these goals. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. DeFazio. And now I would like to yield some time to the ranking member of the committee, Mr. Graves, if he is available. Mr. Graves. I guess he's not there yet. So I'll go on to the next item. Before we proceed, I ask unanimous consent to insert into the record the following statements. A statement from committee member Representative Strickland. A statement by NAACP Legal Defense and Education Fund. A statement by National Utility Contractors Association. A statement by Clean Water for All Coalition. A statement by the Ohio Environmental Council. A statement by Water Reuse Association, and a statement by American Society of Civil Engineers. Without objections, it is so ordered. Okay, we will proceed to the witnesses, and I will start with Mr. Berger. Hold on just a second. Okay, we thank you. We will proceed to hear from our witnesses who will testify today. Thank you for being here and welcome. We have Mr. David J. Berger, Mayor of the City of Lima, Ohio, Bill Sturwood, Chairman of the Puyallup Tribe of Indians in Tacoma, Washington, O.J. McFoy, General Manager of the Buffalo Sewer Authority in Buffalo, New York, Tom Teskey, Vice President and General Manager of East Jordan Iron Works, Incorporated in East Jordan, Michigan, Brenda Coley, Co-Executive Director of Milwaukee Water Commons, and David Molino, Legislative and Political Director of Labor's International Union of North America. Welcome all of you. And without objection, your prepared statements will be entered into the record, and all witnesses are asked to limit their remarks to 5 minutes. And I ask everybody to please mute their mics until you have a chance to ask questions. And I will address Mr. Berger, because we have been told you have an excellent, we're witnessing our subcommittee before, and I remember that. I am told you are retiring in November, having served as mayor of Lima, Ohio for 32 years. That is quite a record. Thank you for your many years of service to your community, and congratulations on your well-deserved retirement. You may proceed with your testimony, sir. Mr. Terham, you're on.
Thank you and good morning, Chair Napolitano, Ranking Member Rouser, and other members of the committee. I serve as not only the mayor of Lima for the last 32 years, I'm also the chair of the Mayor's Water Council. I thank you for the invitation to give the Conference of Mayors perspective regarding the urgent need for investment, as well as a new approach to address America's wastewater infrastructure needs. As mayor, I spent over 15 years in negotiations with Ohio and US EPA over long-term control plans to solve a set of combined and sanitary sewer overflow problems. I also participated in a decade of discussions with EPA headquarters and regional offices on integrated planning, green infrastructure, and affordability. So a significant portion of my professional life has been spent on this, which makes me a reluctant expert. And my message is this: we are on an unsustainable path when it comes to providing water and wastewater services in an affordable manner. Local governments are stuck on an unsustainable financial treadmill. Decisions made by the federal government to reduce financial assistance without restricting costly mandates have placed a severe financial burden on us. The combination of consequences from federal water policy mandates that force aggressive and oftentimes unachievable goals, coupled with the high cost of building and operating the necessary infrastructure to provide core services that comply with federal mandates, is now beyond the means of half the nation's population. The net effect of mandates and the lack of federal infrastructure investments puts cities in increasingly higher long-term debt, with accompanying rate hikes that have the effect of raising basic service levels that are unaffordable to a growing percentage of Americans. I want to thank this subcommittee for drafting the Water Quality Protection and Job Creation Act, a bill without any additional mandates included. We are already struggling with the burden placed on us, and we ask that you recognize that we cannot do more without a substantial influx of new money from the federal government and a change in the way that we handle mandates. Local governments are doing their part. The 2018 census estimates that cities spent $130 billion for municipal water and sewer utilities. And from 93 to 2018, we cumulatively spent $2.25 trillion, 1.23 trillion on water and 997 billion on sewer and wastewater. That means that 98% of annual spending on water and sewer utilities is by local governments. During that same time frame, with the exception of 2008, the amount of money appropriated to the Clean Water and Drinking Water SRFs never exceeded $3 billion annually in the form of grants to states who in turn give us loans that we have to pay back with interest. Our investment has been additionally challenged by other economic factors. Take, for example, the impacts of the Great Recession on water and sewer utilities. When recessions hit and revenues decline, utilities must pare budgets and shift resources to continue service for public health protection and regulatory compliance. The result was to ultimately stifle up to $105 billion in infrastructure investment over more than a decade and thereby stress our systems even more. Further, it has been decades that we have seen anything but level funding from Congress. Higher authorization levels without increases in appropriations is frustrating at best. We need the federal government to step up. The Conference of Mayors developed the Mayor's 2020 Vision document where we call for additional federal funding in the area of water and wastewater infrastructure, as well as additional flexibility in order to maintain affordability for our citizens and our cities. Our recommendations include promoting integrated planning, implementing the 2021 affordability guidelines, investing in smart technologies, and developing efficiencies in the water energy nexus. By thinking more broadly and creatively, we can better tackle our infrastructure needs and provide cost-saving solutions. We also recommend taking a critical look at what our infrastructure and compliance priorities should be. If a mandate costs millions of dollars but has modest environmental benefits, would that money not be better spent on other more pressing infrastructure, environmental, and public health priorities? Related to this, I'd like to thank this committee for passing integrated planning, which my own committee has utilized. Integrated planning can provide the flexibility to begin to realign requirements with local priorities and local financial capabilities. It is a huge step in the right direction. We need more tools like this to maintain and rebuild our infrastructure while addressing resiliency and cybersecurity. On behalf of the Conference of Mayors, we stand ready to work with you to help develop these necessary solutions. Thank you for inviting me to participate.
Thank you very much, sir. And now we will hear from Mr. Bill Sturrett. You may proceed, Mr.
Good morning. My name is Bill Sturrett. I am the chairman of the Puyallup Tribe of Indians in Tacoma, Washington. I would like to thank Chairman DeFazio, Chairwoman Napolitano, and our Congresswoman Strickland for the opportunity to present testimony on this important topic of the need for greater investments in America's wastewater infrastructure. The Puyallup Tribe is a federally recognized tribe located in Pierce County, Washington, along the shores of Cominston Bay, a large inlet of Puget Sound. The reservation consists of approximately 28 square miles in Pierce County, Washington, and includes the city of 5 portions of the city of Tacoma. Today, the tribe has more than 5,461 members. In addition to serving our members, we serve more than 29,000 Native Americans from our 200 federally recognized tribes and Alaskan villages. The pandemic has brought into focus the massive health disparities that exist between Indian country and the rest of America. In many cases, this health disparity exists because there is a lack of water and sanitation infrastructure in Indian country. The Indian Health Service estimates almost 30% of the homes in Indian County lack proper sanitation infrastructure. Thus, the simple act of washing your hands for 20 seconds is something that too many people in Indian country cannot do. The lack of waste sanitation infrastructure results in higher incidence of cancer, obesity, diabetes, and other chronic diseases. Beyond the direct health impacts that Indian country experiences because of poor sanitation, there is the impact to our natural environment. Numerous reports have documented the impact that outdated and failing septic and sewage treatment facilities are having on the health of the Puget Sound. Failing septic and sewage treatment facilities are a direct threat to all life in the Puget Sound. Wastewater treatment plants account for about 70% of the Puget Sound's overnutrients. The increased nutrients in the Puget Sound deplete the oxygen levels in the water, causing a condition called hypoxia, creating dead zones in the water. Essentially, when a creature enters a hypoxic water area, it dies from the lack of oxygen before it can get out. Today, the Indian Health Service estimates that there is a $2.57 billion backlog in sanitation, infrastructure, and tribal communities. We know it is far greater as the Indian Health Service only considers Indian homes, does not consider the sanitation needs of our government facilities, schools, businesses, or non-Indian homes in our communities. The EPA's Clean Water Indian Set-Aside is an important partner in addressing this need. The current $30 million that is provided, while appreciated, is insufficient. We need a substantial investment now to address this critical backlog. Thus, we support the proposed Water Quality Protection and Job Creation Act and the proposed $2.5 billion in wastewater infrastructure assistance for Indian communities. With this increase in funding, some important changes could be made to the program. We think that a portion of this increased funding should be dedicated to improving environmental water quality with an emphasis on protecting treaty resources. In this regard, we think the program should encourage tribes and other governments to work together to address this issue. We want to work with municipal systems to address combined sewer overflows. The Puyallup tribe receives notices about CSOs almost every day. This means that every day raw sewage flows into the Puget Sound. We think the program can be adapted to encourage more partnerships between governments to work collaboratively to address these environmental threats. We also think the program must be modified to allow tribes to use this funding to address the sanitation needs of the entire reservation community. It does not matter if the waste is from a home or a tribal school, it presents the same health and environmental threat. Thus, tribes need the resources to address these sanitation deficiencies associated with our community facilities and our businesses. We appreciate the opportunity to testify and highlight the needs of Indian country on this critical topic. Thank you.
Mr. Thank you very much for your testimony. We will proceed with Mr. McFoy. You may proceed.
I would like to thank and begin by thanking the House Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure Chair, Peter DeFazio, and the Subcommittee on Water and Environment Chair, Grace Napolitano, as well as the respective ranking members, Congressman Sam Graves and Congressman David Rozier, along with the other members of this subcommittee who are present, for this opportunity to talk with you today about the importance of federal investment in water infrastructure. My name is Olole McFoy, and I'm the General Manager of the Buffalo Sewer Authority. As an active member of the New York Water Environment Association, a board member of U.S. Water Alliance, and I serve on the board of directors for the National Association of Clean Water Agencies, or NACWA, and I am testifying on behalf of that association today. NACWA represents hundreds of public wastewater and stormwater agencies nationwide that are on the front lines of public health and environmental protection. While I'm here today to share my experiences from Buffalo, many of the challenges facing my city are shared by other utilities and communities nationwide. Buffalo is a northeastern city that has seen its share of ups and downs. It is a city with a proud record of innovation, fortitude, and perseverance, while also having a pretty good football team as of late. Historically, cities like Buffalo had a partner in the federal government when it came to building critical infrastructure like water and sewer systems. From the WPA funding that allowed the ribbon cutting of our primary treatment plant to the construction grants program that ushered in our secondary plant expansion, this partnership was vital to helping Buffalo and other communities around the United States provide working class families the opportunity to have good jobs, good wages, and stable neighborhoods. However, over the last decades, the nature of that partnership has changed as the federal government's investment grew smaller and smaller, now estimated below 5%. And localities like Buffalo had to take on greater shares of that infrastructure cost. That shift to a greater local cost share had unintended consequences because it came at a time when local governments were losing their ability to raise revenues sufficient to cover the high cost of these types of capital projects. As a result, our infrastructure deteriorated, with the work being done on it relegated to mostly maintenance, repairs, and necessary replacements. This has proven to be an unsustainable approach. Currently, the costs of capital infrastructure are being borne by a segment of ratepayers who, as in Buffalo, a city with a 30% poverty rate, simply cannot afford to pay it. The key to ending this cycle and restoring a sense of equity to our water utility systems is having a re-engaged federal partner that is willing to help fund the infrastructure work that will allow cities to modernize their systems. The recent commitment by Congress of $638 million towards low-income water assistance is a critical stopgap policy that will help meet the immediate needs of residents whom water is becoming increasingly inaccessible. However, only long-term and sustained infrastructure investment by and in partnership with the federal government will ever achieve the necessary water affordability that we all need to see become a reality. This can be accomplished through significant increased funding to existing programs like the Clean Water SRF, WIFIA loan program, the Water Workforce Grant Program, and the Storm Overflow Stormwater Grant Program. This can also be accomplished by establishing a permanent federal low-income water assistance program, as well as through strong jobs and infrastructure-based stimulus package. NACWA is pleased to strongly support all of these approaches through our new Affordable Water Resilient Cities campaign. Water is not only a requisite for life, but also an important contributor to our public health, economic development, and the revitalization of our neighborhoods. We can't consistently deliver innovative green infrastructure and smart water projects to protect the environment without our federal partner. We are not asking for just an infusion of funding, but instead for a recommitment to the idea that people who live in cities like Buffalo have a future where they can raise a family, find a good job, and live a healthier life. Finally, it is important that local policymakers have the ability to use the federal funds in the manner that will result in the greatest good in their respective cities. In Buffalo, we are committed to the imperative calls for racial equity, environmental justice, climate change, and economic development in every policy and program we undertake. I hope that the subcommittee will consider these factors as it continues its work to develop legislation that will help improve water infrastructure system funding in Buffalo and other cities and communities across the nation. I would like to thank the members of the subcommittee for their time and the opportunity to present my thoughts on the critical need for increased federal investment in water infrastructure. I would be happy to answer any questions that you may have at that time.
Thank you, Mr. McFoy. That's very kind of you. And we will proceed with Mr. Teske. Mr. Teske, you may go.
Good morning. My name's Tom Teske, and I'm Vice President and General Manager of EJ Americas, formerly known as East Jordan Iron Works. EJ is a global leader in the design, manufacture, and distribution of products critical to our nation's water and wastewater infrastructure, such as fire hydrants, valves, valve boxes, access covers and frames, curb inlets and frames, and drainage grates. These products are all made from recycled scrap metals that are melted, poured, finished, machined, coated, and assembled in the United States. EJ is a family-owned company that has a long history of investing in American workers and communities. The EJ legacy dates back 5 generations to 1883, when our first manufacturing facility was built in East Jordan, Michigan. While we are now a global enterprise, we remain dedicated to the U.S. market. Our U.S. employees remain the heart and soul of our company. Today, I'd like to make 3 points. Robust, long-term investments in our nation's water infrastructure are absolutely necessary, and when coupled with a strong Buy American policy, can help drive our economic recovery. Increased funding is crucial. Congress must also ensure that such public investments have the maximum possible impact on the American economy. creating and preserving U.S. manufacturing jobs. These investments are maximized when they are tied to Buy America preferences for U.S. produced products, such as American Iron Steel policy applicable to the Clean Water State Revolving Fund projects. When these laws apply, there's increased demand for EJ's products and a corresponding increase in demand of our suppliers and service providers. As for our hourly team workers, this means more take-home pay to support their families and spend in their communities. The absence of Buy America laws applied to federal aid infrastructure spending diminishes the effectiveness of U.S. regulatory policy. We must compete against foreign, state-owned, or subsidized foundries that regularly flout international trade laws, have no regard for worker safety, the environment, or public health, and are not required to operate by comparable regulatory standards. This creates a significant competitive disadvantage for American producers that has led to lost sales, closed plants, lost tax revenues, and lost jobs. The American foundries that have survived utilize state-of-the-art energy-efficient processes and pollution control systems. As a result, our plants are among the safest and most environmentally sound in the world. American companies deserve a common sense preference for meeting, not avoiding, these standards and for keeping jobs here in the U.S. Buy America incentivizes companies like EJ to make long-term investments in communities and workers across the United States. In the last 2 decades, EJ has made a number of acquisitions and significant capital investments to reinvest in our business and modernize our manufacturing capabilities. Among our 3 largest capital investments in the U.S. are 2 brand new foundries. In 2001, we commenced operations in the Ardmore, Oklahoma foundry. The $70 million greenfield investment was constructed on a former U.S. military site and features state-of-the-art environmental control technologies. In 2019, we made another significant capital investment when we constructed a new fabrication facility in Schuylkill, New York. The $11 million facility was constructed using steel produced by Nucor in New York State and was built a short distance from the site of a fabrication facility we acquired in 2012, allowing for the retention of all its skilled workforce. After 135 years at its original location, in 2018, EJ started operations in a new flagship foundry in East Jordan, Michigan. A $140 million capital investment, the new foundry features 4 electric melt furnaces, 2 molding lines, and advanced automation and technology, and significantly reduced our carbon footprint. The existence of Buy America applied to federal aid infrastructure spending was an important factor in our decisions to proceed with these capital investments. I'm here to tell you that Buy America policies work, and EJ investments in its U.S. manufacturing capacity are demonstrable proof. Thank you very much again for giving me the opportunity to testify today.
Thank you very much, Mr. Teske, for your testimony, and we proceed on to Ms. Coley. You may proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chair Napolitano, and the ranking members and Chairman DeFazio for inviting me to testify to this committee. My name is Brenda Coley, and I am the co-executive director of Milwaukee Water Commons, a cross-city network that fosters connection, collaboration, and broad community leadership on behalf of our common waters. We promote stewardship of equitable access to and shared decision-making regarding water. In our view, people value water infrastructure when they don't have to think about it. But for many Milwaukeeans, water infrastructure comes to their attention when it poses risk to their health and environment. There is an urgent need for infrastructure investments across the nation and for federal leadership to equitably fund the repair of water infrastructure. Our delay in addressing the need to replace aging water infrastructure contributes to ongoing economic, environmental, and public health crisis. Milwaukee's Connecticut River watershed is an example where historic approaches on managing water have fostered community vulnerability. On Milwaukee's south side, a predominantly Latinx community, historical decisions to move stormwater out of dense, low-lying neighborhoods have resulted in land cover that is mostly impervious, including large sections of the river that flow through underground tunnels or concrete channels. Infiltration between wastewater and stormwater systems in the KK River watershed leaks human sewage directly into the river and ultimately into the Great Lakes. The removal of concrete, river naturalization, and installation of green infrastructure could benefit public health by reducing the urban heat island effect, preventing neighborhood flooding and flash floods, restoring natural ecosystems, and filtering water where it falls, to reduce the load of bacteria and other contaminants in the river. Despite this urgent need and local expertise to develop these solutions, the cost of concrete removal is so great that it is unrealistic to expect locally funded action to remediate this blatant environmental justice. Racial and economic inequities are embedded in the history of how we have funded water infrastructure in this country. Let me trace a portion of that history for you. Drinking water, wastewater, and stormwater systems were built in major cities like Milwaukee during the early to mid 1900s. Over the latter half of the 20th century, there was a massive build out of water infrastructure into the suburbs. This was paid for by, number one, substantial federal funding via grants and urban water ratepayers. At the same time that expansion of water infrastructure supported the flight of white residents to the suburbs. Redlining and other racist housing policies limited where Black families could live. Living wage jobs fed to the suburbs as well. Today, the water infrastructure for the metropolitan Milwaukee is built on the backbone of Milwaukee's water systems. Milwaukee's water purification system provides drinkable water for the suburbs, and its water treatment plants process their wastewater. But the pipes and other infrastructure connecting these systems is newer in the suburbs and older in the city. In the city, our water systems are 50 to 100 years old. Following these demographics and economic shifts, the system for financing water infrastructure changed too. The share of infrastructure needs covered by federal funding has gone way down from 63% in 1977 to 9% in 2014. Most of the federal funds provided today are as SRF loans, and the money to repay these loans comes from water ratepayers because water utilities are reluctant to raise rates to unaffordable levels. Infrastructure needs go unmet. It is not enough to write a check funding water infrastructure, but challenges needs to be intentional about workforce equity and community benefits. In 2018, Milwaukee Water Counties facilitated one of 7 water equity task force groups piloted by the U.S. Water Alliance across the country. In Milwaukee, the task force is a cross-section of partnership between water utilities, environmental nonprofits, educational, and workforce development organizations. Based on that process, we recommend that legislation to fund water infrastructure investments should require recipients to track and report on the diversity of workforce and of contractors and subcontractors. Report on policies and practices aimed at workforce equity, and report how funded programs address environmental justice. We also recommend that federal investments in water infrastructure should include procurement preferences for projects with an additional commitment to establishing community benefits agreement. In closing, your legislation appropriation funding for water should achieve 3 things: shift away from loans towards federal grants, restore the amount of federal funding for water infrastructure to levels provided in the mid-20th century, and prioritize grant funding for utilities serving racially and economically segregated urban communities to redress racial and economic inequalities embedded in the history. Lastly, my hope from a community perspective is that public water systems be understood as a public good and service that assures safe, clean, affordable water for all, protects our natural waters, and protects us against the threats from climate change, and that they must be paid for accordingly as a shared public good. Thank you very much.
Ms. Coley, and now we will proceed to Mr. Molino. Mr. Molino, you may go.
Thank you, Chairman Napolitano, Ranking Member Rouser, and members of the committee for inviting me to testify before you today. My name is David Molino, and I'm here on behalf of the Laborers International Union of North America, LIUNA. LIUNA members are engaged daily in efforts to build and maintain our nation's vital physical infrastructure, the things that we use so often that we don't pay any attention to them until something fails: a bridge, a tunnel, the electricity grid, water systems. The program under this committee's jurisdiction provide family-sustaining work for LIUNA members who are actually building the infrastructure systems that make our daily lives possible and keep the wheels of commerce moving. The topic of today's hearing is both timely and important. Properly constructed and maintained wastewater treatment systems are the most basic and critical infrastructure systems for protecting public health and the environment. According to EPA's most recent needs survey, which was released nearly 10 years ago, communities have documented at least $271 billion of investment over the next 20 years to bring their systems to a state of good repair. I imagine the current need is likely higher. Existing infrastructure is aging and critical failures are increasing at a rapid rate and in desperate need of repair and replacement. Wastewater infrastructure must also become more resilient to the impacts of climate change, including sea level rise, stronger and more frequent storms, and flooding. Much of our nation's water infrastructure piping was put in the ground over 50 years ago, and many communities have failing pipes that are over 100 years old. Additional funding dedicated specifically to the replacement of failing wastewater and drinking water pipes should be authorized. LIUNA supports increasing the authorization levels for the Clean Water SRF to help ensure a stable funding source, particularly for wastewater infrastructure needs. Unfortunately, America's infrastructure needs disproportionately impact economically disadvantaged communities across the nation. More than 2 million people do not have access to high-quality drinking water and wastewater services. According to the Indian Health Service, whose workers LIUNA proudly represents, sanitation deficiencies on tribal lands include more than 1,800 projects with an estimated cost of $2.78 billion. Federal legislation is urgently needed. Last Congress, the committee unanimously reported H.R. 1497, the Water Quality Protection and Job Creation Act of 2019, which sought to authorize federal appropriations for major Clean Water Act infrastructure programs, including the Clean Water SRF. The legislation being considered should build on that bipartisan effort and increase the authorization levels for clean water. The fund is the primary source of federal support for wastewater infrastructure and has proven to be one of the most effective environmental infrastructure funding tools in our nation's history. Thousands of wastewater treatment facilities and stormwater management projects have been constructed with SRF dollars over the past 30 years, contributing directly to improved water quality in lakes, rivers, and estuaries across the nation. Congress must renew the federal commitment to clean water infrastructure and set authorization levels at the appropriate level to address the documented project backlog and provide funds for critical resiliency upgrades and other future needs. LIUNA and our partners in the Water Infrastructure Network, an organization that includes other unions, contractors, elected officials, drinking and wastewater service providers, and engineers, are pleased to continue to support the current effort. We commend the committee's bipartisanship on these issues, and we support increasing authorization levels to support the adequate investment into wastewater infrastructure. The need is there, the workforce is available, and the benefits unquestionable. Water infrastructure investments have interrelated benefits that are so broadly shared that failure to make them is unreasonable, bordering on the absurd. Direct job creation for LIUNA members, indirect job creation that results from those workers having money in their pockets, improved public safety, improved environmental health, which in and of itself creates another stream of job creation and economic benefits. Few, if any, federal investments have such a beneficial impact on the American people. It is incomprehensible that we delay in making them. Estimates vary a bit, but it's projected that for every $1 billion invested in our nation's water infrastructure creates over 20,000 jobs in communities across America while improving public health and the environment at the same time. By including domestic and local sourcing of labor and material requirements, Congress can spread the benefit of these investments across wider segments of the economy and help local communities reap even greater economic benefits. I'll wrap up and just say I'm happy to take any questions. And we look forward to working with the members of the committee to enact this important legislation. Thank you for the time, and I look forward to taking any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Molino, and all the testimony is very, very enlightening to a lot of us. And thank you. We will now proceed to our question period. And again, we will use the timer to allow 5 minutes for questions from each member. If there are additional questions, we may have a second round, maybe. I will begin the questioning by allowing Mr. DeFazio to proceed. Mr. DeFazio.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate the opportunity to ask questions first. Mr. Molino, you just said over 20,000. So you're in substantial agreement with the utility contractors that they said 28,000 per billion invested in wastewater. So it's somewhere between 20 and 28, would you say?
I've seen the numbers range between 23 and 28, and I like to hedge my bets. So I went broad.
Okay. And you said, you repeated, which I think reinforced Mr. Teskey, that domestic sourcing is critical because that also creates more jobs in the United States. Is that correct?
Absolutely. The laborers support Buy America strongly, as well as a host of other labor standards to make sure the job creation is quality job creation.
Great. Mr. Teskey, you talked about expanding your plants in the U.S. That was impressive. What if the federal government was making more investment? How are we going to source? And we have a strong Buy America. What's going to happen? Do you think you would be building potentially more plants or otherwise expanding your capacity?
Well, I think first we're going to grow our capacity and make sure that our plants are running closer to 100% capacity. And beyond that, I would say we continue to look to grow and then grow manufacturing capacity. And I'm also involved with the Municipal Casting Association, which is a number of different domestic foundries who are all committed to growth and meeting demand. We look forward to the opportunity, sir.
So if the investment in the near future, you're pretty confident, at least by expanding perhaps, your shifts or other things within the capacity of your plants, you could meet demand, an increased demand short term.
Yeah, yes, sir. I'm very confident that we can.
Okay, great. To anyone, the SRF was created back in the Reagan era instead of direct grants to municipalities or counties or sewer districts. This puts the state in the driver's seat. Are there issues with the fact that the state chooses the priorities? I know that this has been in particular a problem, with tribes in the past, and that's why I did tribal self-determination on transportation a number of years ago. But I mean, it also seems to me it could be creating issues for local districts or communities. Some state governments or agencies tend to favor certain areas of the state and neglect others. Anybody have thoughts on how we could, if there are problems at that level, and how we could deal with them? Okay, well, it's a thought. You can get back to me later if anyone has a thought on that. Okay, Madam Chair, with that, I would yield back, but I would urge people to think about the role of the states here and how they prioritize things and whether or not we need to be, we are being more directive, proposing to be more directive in terms of funds to low-income communities with forgivable loans and with a certain percentage, and to tribal governments and other underserved areas. But I'd just like to see if people can get back to us later if they have further thoughts. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would ask all witnesses to consider it and replying to us in writing to the committee. Thank you very much. Next, we have Ranking Member Rouser. Mr. Rouser, you may proceed.
Thank you, Madam. Thank you, Madam Chair, and I greatly appreciate the benefit of the testimony of our witnesses today. There's no question there's a tremendous amount of need. The question is what we can afford and how can we pay for it. And what I really want to focus on is how do we get the most value for the taxpayer dollar? How do we get the biggest bang for the buck? Mayor Berger, you had focused in on and had specifically mentioned that we need to have a change in how we handle mandates. Would you mind expanding on that a little bit? And as a follow-up to that, how can regulations be smarter and implemented more efficiently to reduce that regulatory burden and those unfunded mandates, and yet still provide the environmental protection that we need?
Thank you, Congressman. The sense of my sense about this is that we continuously see mandates kind of rolling down the hill at us all the time. And consequently, it was very welcome news to, as I mentioned in my testimony, to understand that this authorization bill that you're considering has no additional mandates. So I think the first issue is not to act on additional mandates for local government unless and until there really are resources made available on the scale that can address the mandates that are being given to us. What our sense is that the affordability for local communities is truly pricing water and wastewater beyond the households of the poor and the middle income. And as a result, that simply will, over time, force people off of our systems, force them to consider options that perhaps are not healthy, and consequently, I think they become self-defeating. So my first option is not to invent additional mandates, again, without a scale of resources that allow us to deal with that. And certainly with, we could point to recent action on the lead and copper rule. We could point to the kinds of concerns that obviously are there around phosphorus and nitrogen levels. All those kinds of things have real dollar impacts that we need resources from the federal government to help us address if we're going to be expected to address them.
You also talk a lot about integrated planning. There's some that believe that integrated planning uses affordability as an excuse to roll back Clean Water Act protections. In your opinion, does integrated planning weaken water quality protections under the Clean Water Act?
I absolutely believe it does not. We were the first community in the nation to actually base our long-term control plan on integrated planning and to get it approved through both the federal government and our state government. And that was in 2014. That process worked for us because we were able to get, as a result of the involvement with the various stakeholders, consideration of an extended term. We didn't get relief on what the objective is. We got a term of 27 years for our consent decree. That was the longest period allowed to a community to address these issues. So on the front end of that process, we had what were called early action projects, which committed us to spending about $60 million out of a $150 million commitment. After we are done with those early action projects, which we're beginning to wrap up now, we will have a period where we get to pay down debt that we've taken on in order to deal with prior projects, but also with some of the early action projects. And by virtue of that pay down period, we then position ourselves in the next phase for the balance of the projects that we commit to be able to afford those with additional future debt. We're not being relieved of any of the Clean Water Act responsibilities that we have under the law, but we are being given time to be able to structure the way in which those projects are done, and thereby keep the rates more affordable than would have otherwise been possible if everything had been expected as when this process began. It was all supposed to be done in 10 to 12 years. That would have bankrupted us. And so this isn't, integrated planning is not about relief from the obligations for clean water. Instead, it's about how do we get it done in an affordable way.
Madam Chair, my time's expired.
Thank you, Mr. Rouser. I appreciate that. The next question period will be mine, and I'm addressing it to Mr. Stirrup. The federal investment, besides providing more federal investment to the tribal lands, what can Congress do to help sanitation services? And so far as the discussion draft for the Clean Water State Revolving Fund, what did we get right? What issues should we address as we move this through the committee process? And what can Congress do to make sure individual households can pay their water bills if rates increase due to improvements? And I'll go ahead and let you answer, sir.
I'm sorry you cut out halfway through and then you came back on. But
providing more federal, beyond providing more federal investment in clean water SRF, what can we do to help tribal communities ensure they have adequate water infrastructure and sanitation services? And what can we get right? What issues should we address? And then what can we do to make the individual household make it more affordable in case the rates are increased because of improvements?
well, that covers a large area, but I can safely say that Indian country, in a lot of ways, is like a has third world conditions. You know, across the country, all Native communities are sometimes isolated. Are last on the list to get federal or state funding, and they need to work together to help us out. And that includes tribal communities. Being able to speak on this subject is very important. The impacts on our health, to our environment, we just need more funding. Treaty resources must be a priority. We have a treaty that allows us to catch salmon, that allows us to go gooey duck diving, shellfish harvesting, and those are all impacted by wastewater, and they're dying. Poor sanitation infrastructure is a big cause. We've lived on these foods since time immemorial, and we need to protect them. They're our health food, they're our medicine.
All right, sir. Well, given the list of infrastructure needs, we rank water infrastructure as the most important. What does investment in water infrastructure mean to the Native American community?
It means like living a healthier lifestyle. It means growing in a good way. It means our treaty protected resources are protected. And that's our lifeblood. And we need help. And we're doing the best that we can. And we're also, working with our state people, our local governments. It's a big issue that we all have to put our hands around.
Well, are your local agencies prepared to provide the operations and maintenance on the improvements?
I'd say yes. We have a good working relationship with the different governments, but we're kind of left out of the argument. Yes.
Understood. Well, sir, thank you very much for your time, and I'll proceed to the next witness. To the next question. Representative Johnson, you're on.
Well, thank you very much, and let me thank all of our witnesses. Let me just preface any questions I might have by calling your attention to the major situation we find ourselves in Texas. I represent Dallas, Texas, and I listened very closely to Mr. McFoy. Mr. McFoy, if you were in Texas at this time, how would you advise us on the infrastructure services that we need to look at? Because what's happened there and what's going on there is likely to happen anywhere. With the climate change, we get predictions about weather changes and things that are going to happen in general. And as much, I don't want to put too much of a burden on you to know about what's going on in other places. But what do we need to do in this country to be more prepared for what we're obviously looking forward to doing, because we're not going to be able to do whatever it takes to completely address climate change in any time that I can foresee in the future. We can work on it little at a time. But I suspect that most major cities can be caught off guard when we have incidences like we're going through in Texas right now. What do you see as we go forward, what we need to do in this country, especially with our water systems, to be somewhat a step ahead?
That's an excellent question. One of the things that we are focusing in here in Buffalo is just having a resilient system. And that goes around with everything that we do. So whether that is capital improvements or our operation and management and management of our facilities, it is critical that you look at the risks associated with climate. So here in Buffalo, we're on the shores of Lake Erie, and what we've been seeing is high water, and that has had an effect on where we have our facilities located. So that is our issue. Of course, it snows here all the time, so we're used to the snow end of it. But other places have to see, with climate change, what are the different aspects that are coming their way, and then focusing on the resiliency of all of their platforms. So while I don't have specifics on what is going down in Dallas and in Texas area, that would be my advice to all of our peers, is that we really focus in on the resiliency, especially in the face of these climate realities.
Well, thank you very much. Are there any other witnesses who'd like to comment on that? I can certainly understand why. What then? Can we, and I guess this is basically to Mr. Malino, you outlined the need for investment in America's wastewater infrastructure, and you note that an estimated 10 trillion gallons of untreated runoffs flow into America's streams and rivers annually, and that it is projected that more than 56 million new users will be connected to centralized treatment systems over the next 2 decades. Every major city, of course, needs to be thinking of this. What do you believe would be the best federal policy that would allow for immediate action in providing for these changes that we need to start to address?
First and foremost, more money. I mean, this is a problem of lack of resources, and we need a renewed federal commitment to additional resources to allow communities and states across the country to build out their infrastructure needs. And one of my colleagues once said, it isn't a problem if money can solve it. This is a lack of resources issue, and getting money to actually do infrastructure projects is the best way to improve people's lives.
Can you comment on how? Thank you, Madam Chair. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. And now, because I skipped my Republican colleagues, I'll call on Mr. Babin, followed by Mr. Weber. Mr. Babin, proceed.
There we go. Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate you. And thank you, Ranking Member Rouser. We also thank our witnesses for being here with us today. I represent Southeast Texas, which is home to many rural constituents that often find themselves lacking easy access to municipal infrastructure that most urban areas do already provide. I, a former mayor myself, along with countless other neighbors of mine, rely on on-site decentralized wastewater systems, also known as septic tanks. And now, according to the State On-Site Regulators Alliance, or SORA, roughly 25% of the population, or about 85 million Americans, rely on decentralized systems to handle their wastewater. The National Association of Home Builders estimates that 30% of all new residential construction will utilize decentralized systems going forward. However, less than 1% of all clean water state revolving funds allocated over the last 40 years has actually gone towards these decentralized systems. And to me, these numbers just simply don't add up when millions of Americans, including Texans, rely on these systems. So Mayor Berger, or any other witness that might want to address this, what role do you see decentralized systems playing in your wastewater infrastructure needs going forward? Mayor?
Congressman, actually, for us, with the city and the townships that are connected to us, most, the entire city is sewered, and a good portion of the contiguous townships. So I personally have no expertise relative to the approach of decentralized systems. I do know that the state of Ohio has begun to more intensively regulate that approach because the failure of systems seems to be increasing. And so inspection regimes, as well as the amount of acreage that home builders are required to take to install systems, all of that, I think, is going to continue to happen in order to adequately treat those wastewater concerns.
Okay, thank you very much. Is there anyone else on the panel that would like to address this septic tank question I have? There are millions of Americans that have to utilize these. Okay. One other question then, Mayor Berger. How can the Environmental Protection Agency, or any other federal agencies for that matter, better serve these systems and the people that rely on them? If you, hopefully I've got enough time for someone else to answer that and take a shot at it as well. Thank you.
Again, sir, I have no personal experience with the systems, and I would hesitate to offer some advice.
Okay. Is there anyone here on this panel that might want to address this? Less than 1% of all of our clean water state revolving funds have been allocated over a 40-year period to these decentralized systems, when 85 million Americans rely on these septic tanks. Anyone else want to take a stab at that? Madam Chair, I'll yield back then.
Well, thank you, Mr. Babin. I think there's probably some might have input later. I would suggest that you write those comments back to the committee, so that we may review them. Next, we have Mr. Weber. Mr. Weber, you may proceed.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm not going to have any questions at this time, but I am staying tuned if you want to check me a little later.
All right, sir. Thank you very much. We'll proceed to Mr. Garamendi. Mr. Garamendi, you're on.
Nobody knows anything about septic tanks.
May I ask that everybody that is not scheduled to speak, mute? Mr. Garamendi? Is he available? If not, we'll skip to Mr. Lowenthal.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. I find the subcommittee on, wastewater infrastructure and the needs and the importance of especially the SRF as the clean water as so important. But one of the things struck me, and I don't know if any of you can help me out, in when I was doing my reading to plan for the subcommittee, my questions, and that is, we've talked about antiquated systems that need to be done, but I'm also concerned about systems that were not prepared or should not be prepared, were not planned for what has been put into them. For example, I was just struck with the flushing of non-flushable wipes that have had tremendous impacts upon systems. People flush these down, and it impacts our sewer pipes and our treatment facilities. And I'm most concerned about a sentence that I read, and I'm not sure that any of you can help me, and that is that they contain microplastics that don't break down. So we're now talking about microplastics, and those clog the system. But I'm also concerned about, have you found that the public health crisis, we are ingesting all those microplastics. Have your systems had problems being, especially I'll ask Mr. McFoy about non-flushable wipes? What should we be doing about it? And have anybody studied or seen the impact of these microplastics that clog the system, but they also clog the human body too? And so I'm very, very concerned about that issue of microplastics that get into us and get into our systems and clog the systems themselves. So should we be doing something about that, about what, how it's not just old systems, it's the fact that these systems were never designed to deal with some of these issues. So I'm wondering if anybody has had to deal with any of those issues. Maybe Mr. McFoy.
Congressman, I can take that one. As far as the first one, which we talked about, flushable wipes, to many of us in the utility industry, that's a misnomer. What we have found is, in most cases, they are not meant to go down into our systems because they simply do not break down by the time that they reach our treatment facilities, and hence they cause havoc not only in our sewer system, but when they reach to our treatment facilities, as with our screening facilities and things of that nature. And microplastics here in Western New York, we technically have a microplastics ban in place because of the health concerns with many of those microplastics making their way. What we have been pushing for from a state level here and nationally has really been to push that back onto the manufacturers of these microplastics to make sure that they deal with their waste in the same way with the flushable wipes. That responsibility is placed on them before it becomes a problem in our systems and for our residents and customers.
I have a bill which is very similar, a little different concept, but very similar to what you're saying, is to push it back to the producers. I have a bill on plastics in general, and instead of asking cities and counties to do all the work in terms of recycling and cleaning up of plastics, to put it back on the extended responsibility on the producers of the plastic. So I agree with you that it's the producers, they should not be putting these microplastics in, and it really should be their responsibility to help clean up or to prevent all this from happening. And they're not being responsible. And my bill is called Break Free from Plastics Pollution Act, and in the Senate it's Senator Merkley and myself are reintroducing that bill this year, but it really deals with the same concept that you're saying. It's the producers of the plastics that really have to deal with this issue, and they're not frequently. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Lowenthal. It is very interesting to note those are ideas. We also must consider all the contaminants in the water because of COVID, and what are the future contaminants that we have to deal with in our water, and the process by which we have to clean that water. We move on to Mr. Mast. Mr. Mast, you may proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I want to thank all the witnesses for being here to discuss how wastewater treatment infrastructure, how it's impacted the economy, how it's impacted the environment, how it's impacted the public health of our communities. And I want to talk about this issue as something that's incredibly personal to me and a solution that is readily available. Now, first, I would be hopeful that we could all agree that everybody, no matter how much money they have, where they live, or anything else, that something that the government should be tasked with providing above anything is access to clean environment, clean air to breathe, clean water to drink, clean water to swim in, to clean land to live on, to work and play on. And I'm going to circle this back to a problem in my community. We have been plagued not just by dirty water. That word doesn't do justice to it, but by toxic, literally toxic water, labeled that way by the EPA, by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Toxic, too toxic for human beings to touch, according to the EPA. Water testing as much as 495 times more toxic than what the EPA has said human beings should come in contact with. This happens regularly, decimating ecosystems. As many of my colleagues have spoken about public health, the economy, and this happens, as I said, in my community basically every year, every summer. Now, in my opinion, nobody should be forced to live like this, especially when the solution is so readily apparent. And I want to talk about just one part of that today. It was mentioned in many of the comments that were given here, many of the testimonies, the written testimonies, the Clean Water State Revolving Fund. It's due for an upgrade to reflect the needs that states are facing due to aging infrastructure and also due to population changes. That has to be taken into account as well. So while changes to how the fund's money is dispersed have been mentioned, I think we need to discuss and focus to some degree on the need for adjusting the allotment formula, which hasn't been changed since 1987. So in Florida, my state, as an example, since 1987, our population has approximately doubled, making us the third largest state in the country. However, with the current allotment formula, we rank 10th in the amount of funding that we are receiving. Madam Chair, Madam Napolitano, your state is the most populous state in the U.S., yet under the current formula, your allotment does not reflect the growth of your state's population since 1987 relative to what other states have seen. Mr. Ranking Member, Mr. Rouser, the same is true for your state. North Carolina is the 9th most populous state, yet it's 16th in allotment for the revolving fund. So the Clean Water State Revolving Fund, it gives states the flexibility to address the really diverse water infrastructure needs that we see across the country, but it's not keeping up with the way different states are changing. So as I've said, in Florida, the fund, it's been used for some great projects to assist with converting, as my last colleague spoke about, converting aging septic systems to more sound sewer water systems, addressing non-point source pollution that's hurting our state's water quality. It's been used for a lot of different things, but that calculus, it needs to change. I do have here a letter. I ask unanimous consent to submit this. For the record, it is from the Florida Department of Environmental Protection and their Secretary, Noah Valenstein, that states reforms that could be used for exactly these purposes. I ask unanimous consent to submit that, Madam Chair.
Heard.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And in that, I would urge the committee to look at updating how this revolving fund is being dispersed so that it is dispersed in a more equitable way based upon a state's population and its needs accordingly. In that, Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Mast. That's a great point, and I will look at it further. Mr. Pfas, you are recognized. You may proceed.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Chair, and I want to echo the comments of Mr. Mast and so many other colleagues who are calling for reauthorization and modernization of the Clean Water State Revolving Fund. And that's something I hope we can accomplish in a bipartisan fashion this Congress. Today, I want to focus my comments on an issue that is so critical to the public health concerns in my district, to our environment, to the availability of clean water, and that's the issue of these toxic forever chemicals known as PFAS and the need to regulate them under the Clean Water Act. Ms. Coley, I thought you offered some powerful testimony about the downshifting we have seen of the financial burden from the federal level to local ratepayers to deal with water infrastructure needs. And as this pertains to emerging contaminants that you are seeing in Wisconsin and the need to adapt our water infrastructure to address issues like PFAS, I'm wondering if you could comment on the financial and operational strain that is placed on local utilities in meeting this growing and urgent health crisis that so many communities face across the country.
Thank you for the question. You know, PFAS is a host of contaminants. It's more than one that is affecting our water, and in many ways we don't know exactly what they are. So we really need to have money to research and find out what is exactly in the water. And our waste treatment facilities need to have systems in place where they can filter these PFAS out, which means really, where did they come from? They really came from corporations, you know, knowingly or unknowingly polluting our water, dumping contaminants and poison toxins in our water. And so we have to form a partnership really with these corporations to have some responsibility to mediate their harm that they gave to the environment. So we need money to, we need resources to really do research on this PFAS, to find out what they are, where they are, how we can get rid of them. And then to give waste treatment facilities the resources to be able to filter them out, to be able to look for them. And this is part of it. We do better when we know better, right? And so we have to find out what we need to do. It's the same thing really with these these wipes that are unflushable. We have to first tell the community, educate the community on these issues, but also hold these corporations responsible for this, because these are issues and problems that only the government and only really the corporations can deal with. Individual or communities cannot deal with this on their own. So it's really more of a partnership between wastewater management, between education and research, and then the corporations and the state really looking at this issue holistically.
Well, I appreciate those comments, and I know that your counterparts in my district feel the same way. I think our states need additional federal support to understand the problem, to test for it, and to ensure that contaminants like PFAS do not get out into the environment where they persist for decades and centuries. That's why a bill that has passed the House in the last session, I'm really looking forward to reintroducing it this term. It's the Clean Water Standards for PFAS Act, and it would require EPA to review PFAS discharges under the Clean Water Act and issue regulations to address harmful discharges into our nation's waterways and into the environment. This is important because it would allow EPA to hold these corporations, to hold polluters accountable, and ensuring that they're not just sending these harmful PFAS chemicals directly to publicly owned treatment works, and pass along the burden to our local ratepayers. Additionally, this bill would also authorize a grant program to assist these publicly owned treatment works to make sure that they can comply and that ultimately we're not just perpetuating this type of contamination. So I really look forward to building some support in a bipartisan fashion around that legislation. I hope it can be taken up as part of reauthorization. And I think this could really help a lot of our water treatment facilities around the country deal with this persistent issue.
Congressman.
Oh, go ahead, Ms. Coley. I just have a few seconds left.
I would just say, really, to really work with the EPA as well, to really give them the robust resources they need to provide oversight.
Absolutely. I yield back my time, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Pappas. That's a good point made. We turn now to Ms. Gonzalez Colon. You may proceed. Ms. Gonzalez Colon? Are you on? We'll come back to her later. Ms. Wilson, you are on. Frederica Wilson.
I'm on. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am, you may proceed.
Oh, great. Thank you, Chairman Napolitano and Ranking Member Rouser. Calling this a very important hearing. As the representative of a district on the front lines of climate change, this is all Miami-Dade, economic strife, critical infrastructure needs, this hearing literally hits home. The federal government's decreasing support over the past few decades have left our local communities in a dangerous and precarious position, which has disproportionately affected communities of color like mine. As we recover from this coronavirus pandemic, we must support our local governments and invest in the nation's wastewater infrastructure to increase much needed jobs, bring equitable change to ignored and underserved communities, and upgrade and fortify our systems to coexist with the inevitable impact of climate change. The Congress and the administration's focus on significant infrastructure investment, I'm hopeful we can effectively address these challenges. With that, I have a few questions. Mr. David Molino, legislative and political, I want to thank you, Mr. Molino, for your testimony. You highlighted the tens of thousands of job infrastructure investments would create, including expanding the number of skilled workers among disadvantaged populations. In your opinion, what would Congress do to ensure that disadvantaged populations get the training they need to fill these jobs?
There's no one easy answer for that. Our union, as well as many of the unions, well, all of the unions in the building and construction trades, have apprenticeship programs and training programs, outreach to local communities. But really, it starts with creating the jobs. Without the investment into the job creation, there are no jobs to train for. So it's a holistic approach. We can work with community groups, local groups, to establish training programs, to bring people from the community into our apprenticeship programs, train them for the work, and then refer them out, not just to the job that is going on, but then they have a career pathway to move forward into other construction jobs once the water project or whatever they're working on ends. Community workforce agreements, project labor agreements, we also call them, can establish training and local hire numbers where we can build in with the developer or the contractor targets to reach into the community and bring people from the community into the training programs and put those in those jobs. So again, we have a lot of different sort of, I refer to them as labor standards, but a number of different programs designed to outreach and train local community partners.
Thank you. I'm not sure what that number is. Yesterday we mourned the loss of 500,000 COVID lives. And Congress has to work to protect essential workers. Do you consider major infrastructure investments in the age of COVID? And what else can we do to protect our frontline workers other than vaccines? And that's a big.
You broke up part of the way through there, Congresswoman, so I assume that's still directed to me. You know, the construction industry can expand to bring in displaced workers into the industry, and with the overwhelming infrastructure need that there is, we are expandable, only limited by the lack of resources. The construction economy has continued through COVID. We've seen some local regional job displacements, but many projects have continued forward. We really think of ourselves as a way to solve the underemployment issues that are exacerbated by COVID. And again, it's resources. We can build out a workforce, but we need investment into the projects to create those jobs.
Wow. Thank you so much. Mr. Coley, Ms. Coley.
Sorry, Ms. Wilson, your time is up.
Oh, I yield back.
Thank you, ma'am. We seem to be having a little bit of feedback on Mr. Wilson's line. Hopefully that won't happen on the next one. Mr. Carvajal, you're next. Proceed, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. McFoy, thank you for participating today and coming here. We know that the climate crisis is here and has been negatively impacting our communities, particularly in terms of access to clean water. We are seeing it in Texas now, and we've seen it in countless other disasters as well. Unfortunately, these disasters are becoming all too common. I sponsored legislation, the Clean Water Resilient Infrastructure and Sustainability Act, last Congress, to establish a grant program within the EPA to ensure that our nation's water infrastructure can withstand the threats posed by extreme weather events. Can you talk about how additional resources from the federal government can help local communities provide access to clean water for their residents? And would legislation like my legislation help in these efforts?
Thank you very much, Congressman. While I haven't fully read your legislation, I will do that. But any legislation that focuses in on funding of capital, which is what we need to more readily make our systems as resilient as they can be, especially in the face of climate change. That is some of the things that we are focusing in on here in Buffalo, as well as many of the other the states. So with us being right here on the shores of Lake Erie, every piece of legislation that focuses in on developing climate resiliency plans, on developing hardened infrastructure that will allow us to make sure that we can stand up against these storms that are coming our way and more frequently. So anything like that, we would definitely be in favor of.
Thank you, Mr. McFoy. Mr. Molino, I found your testimony very compelling as you discuss the challenge of maintaining access to water at an affordable rate while dealing with the unpredictability of extreme weather events. As you discuss, we have a backlog of water infrastructure needs. And I know this question is similar to the one that was asked before, but you came across with a lot of feedback. So I'm gonna ask the essence of that question again. Can you elaborate how this backlog is impacting disadvantaged communities? And as infrastructure is in essence a jobs bill, how will investing in water infrastructure help create more jobs? And how we can make sure these are good paying jobs?
I'm going to hope that my microphone problem is fixed. If not, I'll have to log out and log back in. Again, there are a suite of labor standards that help assure that these jobs created are high road jobs. We don't want to see federal investment be used to drive down wages and labor standards. Things like Davis-Bacon protections, again, community workforce or project labor agreements, local hire requirements can all be built in to projects to help spread the benefits across a broad segment of the population. And again, this is an issue that can be solved by more investment. What we need first and foremost is more money into projects, a big infrastructure bill across the board, investments into roads, bridges, water systems, the grid, you name it. We can expand the workforce into to fill that need. Does that answer your question, Congressman? I'm not sure I got it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Molino. It certainly did. I appreciate you being here and I appreciate your answers. So thank you very much. Madam Chair, I yield back.
Mr. Carvajal, and I'll take the prerogative of the chair to recognize Mr. Rouser for one more statement. Mr. Rouser.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I have a copy of a document here from the city of Pleasantville, and I ask unanimous consent to insert in the record on behalf of Representative Van Drew, who sits on the full committee, the City of Pleasantville Sanitary Sewer System Evaluation, if you don't mind.
So ordered.
Thank you much. I have a quick follow-up, if I can, for Mayor Berger and also Mr. McFoy, if he has any thoughts on this. But I wanted to get your thoughts on changes to permitting. What benefits would local communities have with changing the current Clean Water Act law to allow cities to have a 10-year, for example, rather than a 5-year treatment works permit? Just wanted to get your thoughts on that and drill down on that a little bit.
Well, thank you, Congressman. I guess I have two reactions to that. One is the fact that a 10-year permit would give more predictability to a community. I think would be really important for the long-range planning for a local system. I also think that there are real economies that result in savings that result for permits that are 10 years in length, rather than a local team having to gear up every 5 years in order to negotiate. And that team can be multiple outside attorneys, multiple outside engineering firms, along with the internal staff. That marshaling of human resources to deal with a 5-year permit cycle is expensive. So again, I think that the two benefits are a savings that would result from that expense, but also the predictability of a 10-year permit allows, particularly for the kinds of improvements that are required by consent decrees and other orders, a 10-year permit lines up much more for achieving that long-term set of objectives.
Mr. McFoy, do you have any opinion based on your experience?
Congressman, I would love to simply piggyback on what Mayor Berger has said. The stability that a long-term permit provides is wonderful. It allows us really to plan out our capital investment, to reduce those human resources that we do every time it's time for permit review. And it really allows us to right our ship in the direction that needs to happen for everything that we must do as utilities.
Thank you. Madam Chair, I yield back. Thank you
Well,
again.
thank you. Thank you very much, Madam Norton. Representative
Thank
Norton.
you. I
You're
hope
on.
you can hear me.
Yes, we
Chair.
can.
Thank you very much. I want to thank you for this hearing on America's wastewater infrastructure, because it occurs to me that we can deal with some of this even during a pandemic because of the distancing that construction usually involves. I want to begin with Mr. Teskey because he emphasizes the need to Buy America. And you would think we would need that, particularly at a time of job loss here. So what do you see as the biggest benefit of including Buy America provisions in our infrastructure projects, Mr. Teskey?
Well, I think the biggest benefit is the increase of manufacturing jobs here in the U.S. I think we need to refocus on manufacturing jobs. For years, we promoted the service economy. I think that a return to manufacturing job is also return to better paid jobs. And if I could just respond to one thing, I think education is necessary in response to the question earlier. I think as a group, it would be good to include funds to increase people's knowledge of the need for clean water. And one thing too, unfunded mandate.
Thank you very much, but I've not got a lot of time, so I need to go.
Okay, sorry. I apologize.
Mr. Milano of the laborers, I was intrigued by your testimony because of the loss of jobs we've had in the United States during a pandemic. And I know that there are estimates that $1 billion could be invested, or that at least your testimony was that for every $1 billion invested, 20,000 jobs in communities are created. So I'd like you to elaborate on that at a time of job loss, and can't this be done with distancing, with distancing among workers?
Congresswoman, I understand my technology might be failing, so I apologize. Yeah, those estimates, the chairman corrected me. His estimates are 28,000 jobs per billion. I've seen between 23 and 28, so I just try to err on the side of safety. We have had challenges in the construction industry, but a lot of the construction that the laborers do is done outside. When you have a union and a collective bargaining agreement that has safety and health experience and protocols that we've all worked on, we've worked on providing our members and the contractors, providing our members with hand washing stations and personal protective equipment. When possible, we socially distance. You can't always do that on a construction project, but we believe that creating, the correct safety and health protocols can clearly be done in the time of the pandemic, and we have been rather pleased that our industry has been able to continue to work through the pandemic with these safety and health protocols.
Yeah, that is why your industry is so important for our economy. Mr. Berger of the United Conference of Mayors, climate change is one of my most important, one of my great priority issues. So I'd like to know what you think climate change, what effect do you think climate change has had on the infrastructure? Do you think we need to build more resiliency into the system because of climate change?
Congressman, yes. The short answer is absolutely. The climate change represents a enormous challenge. I can just speak for my community. When we modeled for our consent decree and we based our planning on $150 million investment over the next 27 years, that was done with the expectation that we were going to be able to have a certain number of 100-year and 500-year storms. And the capacity of our system would be X amount of gallons of material. Well, in the year following the consent decree, we had 3 of those storms, 100-year storms. Well, when you do long-range planning for infrastructure and it changes on you that quick, it means you have either underspent or you have to redesign. So I think climate change represents enormous problems for communities for that reason. The unpredictability is enormous.
Thank you for that testimony. And Madam Chair, that testimony concerning climate change should be of utmost importance to our own subcommittee, and I very much thank you for allowing me the time to get answers to my questions.
Thank you, Ms. Norton. You made quite a point. I agree with you. Next, we have Mr. Stanton. Mr. Stanton, you're on the line.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. Before I begin my comments, let me just say to my friend Mayor Berger, who I serve with in the U.S. Conference of Mayors, congratulations on 32 years of service. The citizens of Lima have been well served. Mayor Berger taught the rest of the mayors around the country more about wastewater than any other source during my time. And so, Mayor Berger, congratulations. And if you do get bored in retirement, you can always run for Congress.
Thank you, Mayor.
As a new member of this subcommittee, I appreciate our immediate focus on renewing the federal commitment to this vital infrastructure that supports our urban and rural communities and tribal nations, and that is wastewater infrastructure investment. The Southwest is rapidly changing and growing, and Arizona is no exception. We are the fastest growing state in the country. Since 1970, Arizona's population has ballooned from 1.8 million residents now to over 7.5 million people, a 315% increase, 115,000 new Arizonans per year, 300 per day. In 2019, Arizona ranked 3rd in population growth, with many of our communities growing faster and faster than the national average. To sustainably welcome and provide for the millions of people who will call our region and our great state home in the years to come, we must invest in our infrastructure and secure our water future. Last year, the Arizona section of the American Society of Civil Engineers released its 2020 Infrastructure Report Card, which reflects the condition of our infrastructure across Arizona. We received a C- for drinking water and wastewater. This requires immediate attention. In fact, over the next 5 years, we will have a shortfall of almost $1.5 billion in wastewater alone in the state of Arizona. As the former mayor of Phoenix, I know firsthand that local leaders must be innovative when it comes to addressing our aging infrastructure and planning for our water future. And frankly, we can't afford the alternative. We know the future of our residents and of our economy depends on how well we anticipate, plan, and respond to our water-related challenges. Investing and supporting our state's water growth goes hand in hand with taking care of our most precious resource. We have to make sure that federal dollars flow to areas throughout the state of Arizona, like those provided through the Clean Water State Revolving Fund, so that we can continue to address these needs in our communities across state, whether rural, tribal, or urban. I have questions for Mr. Molino of Launa and O.J. McFoy. Mr. McFoy, in addition to providing the federal investment necessary to meet these infrastructure needs, we also must make sure that we have the trained workforce necessary to operate these facilities today and well into the future. The GAO projects that 30 to 50% of the municipal water workforce will be retiring just in the next decade, taking with them decades of experience and knowledge. As we witnessed through the pandemic, the women and men working in municipal drinking water, wastewater, and stormwater are essential workers who provide public health and provide community economic stability. Last Congress, I proposed language that was included as part of the reauthorization of the Clean Water SRF to allow states to reserve up to 1% of the funds they're allocated each fiscal year for workforce development and training. This could equal tens of millions of dollars a year for local water workforce development efforts. Mr. Molino and Mr. McFoy, can you talk about how dedicated funding like this assistance would be helpful in addressing workforce needs and how it might benefit small and rural communities in particular?
Congressman Stanton, I would like to say, thank you. There are many Buffalonians that now call themselves Arizonians. But when we look at the workforce end of this, that is a critical piece that we need in our utilities. As you had mentioned, our workforce has completely changed over the years. And when you look at the report renewing our workforce that was done in recent years, it focuses in on how that workforce is going to look going forward. Our workforce needs to reflect the communities in which we come from. We really are focusing in here on the water side in Buffalo on equity. We really need our workforce to better reflect our communities and also to make sure that they receive all of the training and development needs that they have to get these good paying jobs that we are here to offer going forward.
That's great. And then how about Mr. Molino representing our friends at Leuna?
Well, Congressman, first and foremost, the laborers have and have for generations had a very mature training program. Our members don't pay for their training. The training is provided through joint labor management committees, through contributions that go into our training programs as a result of the hours worked by every member. That money is pooled and the training is again provided to our members free of charge, and that can go for basic skills upgrades, and continued professional development into our sector. As a rule of thumb, we would prefer to not see a lot of federal money be thrown out to the non-union low road construction contracting community who aren't making those investments that our contractors do. Again, I understand that there's need out there and not every community is the same, but we would prefer to see resources go into actual projects that create the jobs, that create the demand that allow us to train for those.
Thank you so much. I
Mr.
yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Stanton. I'd like to go to Mr. Garamendi next. Mr. Garamendi, you may proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate this hearing. It's an extremely important hearing, and one of the advantages of being last is I've learned a lot about issues. I'm going to really limit my questions. The EPA Clean Water State Revolving Fund, the WIFIA Fund, the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund, all of these programs require that American steel and iron be used. But there's a lot more that goes into projects than just steel and iron. Mr. Temke spoke to the issue of, Teskey spoke to the issue of other things. So what I'm really looking at here is whether we should or should not include in any legislation Tammy Baldwin's and my legislation from last year that would require Buy America provisions be written into the programs that we're discussing today, the Clean Water State Revolving Fund specifically, and then also WIFIA, as well as the Safe Drinking Water State Revolving Fund. So my question goes to, first of all, Mr. Temke, thank you so very much for your testimony, where you spoke directly to this. Why don't you take another 30, 40 seconds and hit this theme one more time?
Thank you, sir. Yeah, I think it's very important that all of the products that are used be made in America. These are major capital expenditures that all of these facilities need, and it's best if they're made in the USA. They employ U.S. workers, and they have a ripple effect throughout the economy, throughout the supply chain where the products are made. So thank you.
I really appreciate your testimony where you spoke to the capital investment that your company has made in anticipation of Buy America provisions in the upcoming legislation. I know, Mr. Milano, you're well on this. We worked with you last year on these issues, and we continue to work, no, last year, the last decade on these issues. So I'm going to move to a different subject here in my remaining 2 minutes. Mr. Rouser raised this issue in his last question, and that is, what are we going to do about the discharge requirements, the National Pollution Discharge Elimination Systems, the NEPIDS requirements, presently 5 years. By the time an agency knows that it has a problem, figures out what to do about it, deals with all of the litigation, 5 years is gone. And so the move to a 10-year period of time is, in my view, very, very important. And that's why last year we introduced a bipartisan piece of legislation, HR 1764. I just had a discussion with Mr. Rouser about this. Perhaps we'll reintroduce that bill, taking advantage of his ranking membership on this committee, and get the job done this year. With that, I've covered most of my issues that were covered by other members, and I'm going to yield back my remaining 1 minute and 40 seconds in just a second as I drive home once again the need for Make It in America, Buy American legislation. It does us little good to spend billions and billions of dollars and then see that money offshore to manufacturing facilities in China or other places around the world where American dollars, American taxpayer dollars, are being used to support other economies and not our own. So with that, Madam Chair, thank you so very much for an extraordinarily important hearing. Look forward to working with you and the other members of the committee to make all of this happen so that we can have a Build Back Better legislation that includes clean water. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Mr. Garamendi. You make some great points, and you know I support you, Buy America, totally. Ms. Gonzalez Colon, you may proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and happy to be here. And thank you for holding this hearing. I think it's important. It's an important matter, and in the case of Puerto Rico, actually, we got hurricanes, and the issue of the safety and the future of economic recovery of our communities was impacted as well by the Foundation of Public Health, and actually that is wastewater. And there's no community that can grow without managing wastewater. And that infrastructure is one of the critical services as defined by the Stafford Act. And that's the reason during the last Congress, we actually submitted a bill to manage those definitions. I think that it should be a priority in any kind of disaster recovery. In the case of Puerto Rico, and just to share with the panelists here, our main water utility, Pfas, in the aftermath of the disasters, the wastewater infrastructure suffered more than $600 million in immediate damage under FEMA emergency categories. An additional $3.7 billion allocation for all water and wastewater operations has been announced by FEMA early this year. And as we consider legislation on water infrastructure, the securing of proper priorities of funding of wastewater sector, especially for those economically disadvantaged areas, needs attention of this committee. And especially any proposal must consider those communities that may not have the cash or the resources to match grants, either financially or in kind, and provide means for these communities to be able to benefit from any infrastructure rebuilding initiative. And we can attest to that. In our disaster relief bills in the past two Congresses, we included provisions to allow what Mr. Garamendi just said, Build Back Better process. This must be part of any program, since by building to improve standards, we can have an infrastructure that is more resilient and that can handle emerging situations better. So I look forward to have hearings with EPA, the Corps of Engineers, and other agencies that oversees this important infrastructure. So having said that, having the panelists here, I think I got a question to Mayor Berger. And those should be first, what are the greatest challenge in terms of those matching funds? You suggest in your testimony that increase in the current federal funding commitments. Do you find that the commitments have failed to keep up with the real cost increases? In your suggestion for funding for Army Corps Authority for water and wastewater works, does the organization have a suggestion as to the types of infrastructure that should be a priority to have in their attention?
Well, every community is facing differing challenges. For us, it was a combined sewer system and sanitary sewer. Communities in California, for example, are facing enormous TMDL requirements, stormwater related. I mean, there truly are there's a massive set of expectations and demands, and the geology, the rivers, the streams, the lakes that make up a place all have differing requirements for protection. So I do think the resources need to be at a scale that matters. And then there has to be flexibility to be able to address the unique needs that every community has because of the environment that it occupies.
Question to you and to Mr. McFoy. Do you both consider that stormwater management should be included along with wastewater under the definition of critical infrastructure for the Stafford Act purposes after disasters?
Yes, Mayor Berger.
Go ahead, please.
Just an emphatic yes. It's critical. That is the situation here in Buffalo is our stormwater challenge in dealing with that, and that is we count that as critical infrastructure.
Thank you.
The other thing I would add is that integrated planning, as it's currently been codified, only deals with the wastewater and stormwater. It does not yet include drinking water issues. And I think that one change that the Congress should also be teeing up is the opportunity to actually break down the silos for communities so they can create integrated planning for all their water-related needs. They can then establish priorities and with those priorities, long-range plans for being able to ultimately afford those over time.
Thank you. Yield back, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Gonzalez Colon. I understand Mr. Catco has arrived. I will proceed and let him speak. Mr. Catco, you may proceed.
Thank you, Chairwoman Napolitano. It's good to see you again, my friend. I literally just got back in the office and I wanted to be able to get this, have an opportunity to speak on this most important issue. The community that I represent in Central New York, Syracuse and Central New York area understands the importance of clean water infrastructure all too well. Whether our community is working to replace aging pipes in Syracuse or responding to harmful algal blooms on Owasco Lake or the other tributaries, the need for further investment is clear. Additional federal support is essential to help state and local governments finance essential drinking water and wastewater projects. Ensuring the affordability of clean water for all of our communities is critical, and supporting innovative research that will expand the availability of modernized water infrastructure systems. I look forward to working toward these goals with my colleagues on this subcommittee and to discussing these efforts with today's witnesses. And I got a question for Mr. McFoy. In your testimony, you touched upon the importance of employing innovative clean water technologies. Last year, the House passed, as part of the Moving Forward Act, a program that has this committee supported to help clean water agencies adopt innovative technology solutions to address water treatment improvements. Do you support an innovative technology adoption program to help modernize our nation's water infrastructure to address water quality needs and help bridge a funding gap?
Congressman Catco, absolutely. We know as being just down the Route 90 from each other, yes. Cost-effective, innovative technologies are truly key to how we're going to bridge the gap, not only in funding, but in the efforts that we have to do in respective to climate change. So we are a big supporter of that. And in fact, here in Buffalo, we've been able to focus in on our smart sewers, which have saved us to date, as far as our plan is concerned, over $145 million. And that's by utilizing, artificial intelligence and simply sensors to make sure that we can manage our stormwater challenge most effectively.
Well, I appreciate that. I was going to ask you about some of the technologies. Is there any other technologies that you're employing other than what you just mentioned in the Buffalo area?
Yes, sir. Everything that we can get our hands on, that's what we're trying. From our treatment facility, we have, where we are working on our DO probes and establishing things that will allow us to better manage our energy concerns, to out in our collection systems. We are always focused in on that innovative, cost-effective technology.
So what policies and resources can we in the federal government provide to become a more engaged partner in advancing the use of this technology and increasing potential long-term and cost savings at utilities?
One of the major things that we can that the federal government can definitely provide is really having allocations that are focused in on new technologies and smart water. And I know that has been out there and that's been kind of pushed through, but advanced research projects as well. Those are very critical to how we are going to accomplish the next 21st century utility.
Okay, very well. I thank you very much. Listen, I went to college right up the road at Niagara University, so I know Buffalo well, and it's good to see the renaissance it's undergoing. And the renaissance will be complete when the Bills win the Super Bowl.
Absolutely, sir. Absolutely.
I yield back, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Katko. I appreciate your coming on. And now I must tell you that there are many facets to water. There from climate change to training, manufacturing, Buy America, education, and this goes on. We must ensure that if the money goes to the states, that the states use it for the intended purpose, number one. And I certainly want to thank all the witnesses. You were fabulous, most of them on time, not really bad. And I thank you very much for being with us. You may have given us food for thought, your insight. Thank you very much for all of your testimonies. I ask unanimous consent that the record of today's hearing remain open until such a time as our witnesses have provided answers to any questions that may be submitted to them in writing. And I ask unanimous consent that a record remain open for 15 days for any additional comments and information submitted by members or witness to be included in the record of today's hearing. And without objection, so ordered. I'd like to thank our witnesses again very much. You have been great witnesses, and I thank you very much. If no other members have anything to add, the committee stands adjourned.
Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Bye, thank you.